The rain had been falling since dawn in Seattle, turning the city into a mirror of gray skies and wet streets. Inside her small apartment, Emma sat by the window, wrapped in an old sweater, watching droplets race down the glass. It had been 6 months since Ryan left. 6 months since the silence in her home started to feel heavier than company ever did. She wasn't heartbroken in the usual sense. She was just ... empty. Every day felt the same: wake up, work from home, make coffee. Scrolled through photos she wished she could delete but couldn't. That Thursday night, while reheating soup for dinner, her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it, expecting another spam message, until she saw the name Mark Anderson. She froze for a second. Mark had been her friend back in college, funny kind, the kind of person who made others feel seen. They drifted apart after graduation when life took them in different directions. She stayed in Seattle, working as a graphic designer. He moved to New York to chase his dream of becoming a filmmaker. They hadn't spoken in nearly 8 years. The message was short but warm. "Hey, Emma Random. I know, but I found an old video of us at graduation. You were talking about chasing the sunset that day." I smiled. "Hope you're doing okay?" Emma laughed softly. She remembered that chaos, the tears, the excitement. She replied, and within minutes they were catching up as if no time had passed. What started as a few exchanged texts turned into long conversations late into the night. They talked about life, work, disappointments, and small joys. Mark confessed that his marriage had ended a year ago. He didn't sound bitter, just tired. Emma understood that feeling too well. Within a week, their chats became part of her routine. She'd rush through dinner just to check her phone. His messages made her smile again. There was an ease between them, no pretending, no filters. He'd share snippets of his film projects, and she'd send him her design work. They encouraged each other like they used to in college. It felt like finding a part of herself she thought was gone. One night, Mark mentioned a small documentary he was working on, something personal. He said it was about emotions, honesty, and the hidden lives people carry when no one's watching. "I want to show truth," he wrote. "Not perfection, just real people being real." Emma replied, "That sounds powerful." Then he surprised her. "Actually," he said, "I was thinking of coming to Seattle. Maybe you could help me with a small scene." Emma blinked at the message. "Me? Why me?" "Because you're genuine," he said. "You don't hide behind smiles anymore. You just are." The compliment caught her off guard. No one had said something like that in a long time. Still, she hesitated. "I'm not good on camera." "I don't need an actress," he replied. "I just need you to be yourself." Something in his words touched her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet longing for connection she hadn't admitted even to herself. So she said yes. 3 days later, Mark arrived. When she opened the door, she barely recognized him. He looked older, lines on his face, a bit of gray in his hair, but his eyes still held that same calm energy. He smiled, warm and genuine, and for a second it felt like time had folded back. They hugged briefly. The years between them seemed to fade. They spent the first few hours talking about everything: old friends, college stories, the paths they'd taken. It was comforting. For the first time in a long while, Emma laughed, really laughed. Mark had that effect. The next morning, he set up his small camera. It wasn't anything fancy, just a handheld one and a tripod. He explained that he wanted to film people talking about their truths, what they've lost, what they found, and what they still hope for. "Don't think of it as performing," he told her. "Think of it as remembering." Emma sat on her couch as the soft morning light filled the room. Mark adjusted the camera and said, "Just talk to me. Forget the lens." First, she didn't know where to start. She joked about her bad cooking, her love for old music, the smell of rain in Seattle. But then, without meaning to, she found herself talking about Ryan, how they'd built a life together only to realize they wanted different things. How she kept pretending she was fine until she wasn't. How loneliness had stopped being painful. It just became normal. Mark didn't interrupt. He didn't even move much. He just listened as she spoke, Emma realized how much she'd been holding in. Words came faster, tears came quietly, and before she knew it, she was telling him everything she'd never said out loud. When she finished, there was silence, a calm, respectful silence. Then Mark said quietly, "That was honest. That was beautiful." She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It was messy." He smiled faintly. "Messy is real, and real is what I wanted to capture." They watched the footage together later that evening. Emma sat beside him, nervous, expecting to cringe at her own words. But when she saw herself on screen, she barely recognized the woman she saw. She didn't look broken or weak. She looked ... strong. Vulnerable, yes, but strong. Mark didn't say much as the video played. His attention never left the screen. But when it ended, he looked at her and said, "That's what I wanted to watch." Something in the way he said it made her heart skip. It wasn't just about the film. It was something deeper. They stayed up late, talking about life, about art, about how truth could heal people. Emma realized she hadn't felt this connected to anyone in years. Mark understood her in ways she didn't expect. Before going to bed, Mark thanked her for trusting him. "You gave the film a soul," he said. Emma smiled, feeling warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "You gave me something too," she whispered. The next morning, he packed his things. He had other cities to visit, more stories to film. They promised to stay in touch, though both of them knew something between them had shifted. Before leaving, Mark stood by the door and said softly, "You reminded me that people still feel. Don't lose that." When the door closed behind him, Emma stood there for a long time staring at the space he'd left. She didn't feel sad exactly, just quiet, peaceful. Days later, he sent her the edited video. She hesitated before opening it, unsure what it would stir in her. But as it played, she was struck by how gently he'd filmed her every frame filled with light. Every expression captured with care. It wasn't about sadness anymore. It was about truth, about being seen. Then she noticed something, subtle. Mark's voice, faintly in the background, asking her soft questions. The way his tone carried concern, admiration, tenderness. It wasn't a simple documentary anymore. It was something personal, something shared between two hearts that had once been strangers. When the video ended, Emma felt tears in her eyes again, but not of sadness this time. It was gratitude. She realized she'd shown him something honest, and in return, he'd shown her how to see herself again. Still, a question lingered quietly in her heart. What did he truly want to watch that day? Her story, her pain, or something deeper, something even he hadn't fully understood? She didn't know yet, but she knew one thing for sure: her life had quietly changed, and that was only the beginning. 2 weeks passed since Mark left Seattle, and Emma had returned to her quiet routines: early mornings, work emails, long walks with her coffee mug in hand. Yet something in her had shifted. Every time she sat at her desk, she caught herself glancing at her phone, half expecting a message from Mark. When it didn't come, she told herself she was fine. But the truth was, she missed their late-night talks, the way he listened, the way he made her feel seen. Then one evening, as she was closing her laptop, a notification popped up. It was an email from Mark. The subject line read, "Watch this." Her heart skipped. Inside was a video link and a short note. "This isn't finished yet, but I wanted you to see it first." She clicked the link. The video opened with clips of her talking, her hands fidgeting, her eyes searching for words. But this time, there were new elements. Footage of city streets, raindrops on windows, sunlight moving across old buildings, edited with a quiet tenderness. Mark's voice narrated softly over the images. Sometimes truth isn't what we say, it's what we're afraid to admit. Sometimes we hide, not because we want to, but because we've forgotten how to be seen. Emma watched, speechless. He wasn't just showing her story, he was showing his. She could hear something raw in his voice, something unspoken. The final frame lingered on her smile from that last morning together. Then the screen faded to black dot. Her chest felt tight. She replayed the video twice, then wrote back, It's beautiful, but it feels personal. Is it? His reply came a few minutes later. Yes, it is. They started messaging again that night. Mark told her he'd been traveling for his film, interviewing strangers across cities. Everyone's pretending, he said. It's exhausting. Keep thinking about that day in your apartment, how real it felt, Emma replied. Maybe you just need to stop searching. Sometimes the truth is closer than we think. He didn't answer right away. Then he sent another message. Come visit New York. I want you to see something. Emma's first instinct was to say no. It felt sudden, unexpected. But the idea stayed in her mind all night. She lay awake thinking about him, about the way he'd looked at her not with pity, but with understanding. By morning, she had made her decision. 3 days later, she was on a flight to New York. It felt impulsive, but also strangely right. When she landed, Mark was waiting for her outside the terminal. He looked surprised but happy to see her. The city noise surrounded them, honking taxis, rushing people, but when she saw him, everything else faded. Welcome to New York, he said, smiling. They took a cab to Brooklyn where he lived. His apartment was small but full of life shelves stacked with books. Camera equipment scattered around, photographs pinned to the wall. It smelled like coffee and rain. Emma noticed one photo on the wall, her sitting by the window in Seattle, the shot from his film. You printed it? She asked. He nodded. It's my favorite frame. That night they ordered takeout and talked like old friends. Mark showed her clips from the documentary stories of people from different walks of life. Each one raw, emotional, honest, but something's missing, he said. A center, something that ties it all together. Emma tilted her head. What do you mean? He looked at her quietly. I think it's you. You're the truth I keep chasing. She didn't know what to say. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and delicate. He wasn't saying it romantically, it was deeper than that. It was about connection, understanding, trust. The next day, Mark invited her to help him film one last segment. They went to Central Park early in the morning before the crowds arrived. The light was golden, the air crisp. He set up the camera under a tree and asked her to talk again, this time about what healing meant. At first, she hesitated. But as she spoke, the words came easily. Healing isn't about forgetting, she said. It's about forgiving the version of yourself that didn't know better. The one who stayed too long, loved too hard, or feared too much. It's giving that person grace. Mark listened silently, capturing every word. His camera didn't feel like a lens anymore, it felt like a mirror. When they finished, they sat on a park bench watching people walk their dogs and jog by. You know, Emma said softly, I think you're making this film for yourself more than anyone. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but you helped me find the courage to finish it. That night, they went to his rooftop to watch the city lights. The skyline shimmered against the dark sky. Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace. Mark stood beside her, quiet, his hands resting on the railing. You ever think about how life brings people back when they need each other most? He asked. Emma turned to him. Maybe that's what we're supposed to learn, how to be there, even if it's just for a little while. He nodded, eyes reflecting the city lights. You showed me that. There was a long silence after that, not awkward, just meaningful. Words didn't fit what they both felt. It wasn't love, not exactly. It was connection born from honesty. The next few days went by in a blur of filming, editing, and quiet moments. Emma started helping him organize footage, and together they refined the documentary into something raw and beautiful. Watching him work, she realized how much he cared about truth, not fame, not recognition. It's just honesty. One evening, while reviewing a final scene, Mark leaned back in his chair and said, You know what I've learned making this film? She asked. That the real story isn't about others. It's about us, the people who try to understand them. Emma smiled. Then I guess your story just found its ending. He looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe, or maybe it's just beginning. When the documentary was finally done, Mark arranged a small private screening at a community center in Brooklyn. A handful of friends and fellow filmmakers came. Emma sat in the back row, nervous but proud. The film played, and as it did, she felt her heart swell. Her story wasn't the center, but her words were woven through it like quiet threads of light. When the final scene came, showing her smile as Mark's narration said, "Sometimes the truth we show others is the one we needed to see ourselves." The audience fell silent. Then gentle applause filled the room. Mark turned toward her, eyes shining. "You did this?" he whispered. She shook her head. "No, we did this." After the screening, they walked home together in the soft drizzle. The city glowed around them, reflections dancing in puddles. Mark slipped his hands into his pockets and said, "I don't know what happens next, Emma, but I'm glad it happened." She smiled. "Me too." When they reached his apartment, they stood at the door a moment too long. Neither wanted to say goodbye. The air between them felt full of gratitude, of something unspoken. Finally, Emma said softly, "You showed me what I'd forgotten how to see myself." "And you showed me what I needed to watch," he replied. She laughed gently. "That line again?" "It's true," he said, smiling. "You were the story all along." That night, she knew their paths would probably part again. Life had a way of doing that. But this time, she wasn't sad. Because some people come into your life not to stay forever, but to remind you how to feel alive again. And as she looked out at the rain falling softly against the window, she whispered to herself, "I'm ready to begin again." The morning after the screening, Emma woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. The city felt quieter than usual, as if holding its breath after everything that had happened. Mark was still asleep on the couch. He'd stayed up late replying to messages from people who had watched the film online. It had already begun to spread across social media, shared for its honesty and raw emotion. Emma made coffee and stood by the window watching the rain blur the skyline. Her reflection looked different, somehow calmer, lighter. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She had faced her truth, spoken it aloud, and shared it with the world. Mark stirred and sat up, running a hand through his hair. "You're up early," he said groggily. "Couldn't sleep," she replied with a small smile. "You were snoring." He laughed, still half asleep. "Lies? I don't snore." They shared an easy silence before he added, "We did it, Emma. People are connecting with the film. I've never seen reactions like this." She turned toward him. "Because it's real. That's what people want. Something that feels human." He nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. And I couldn't have done it without you." There was warmth in his voice that made her heart tighten a little. She didn't say anything, just smiled and handed him a cup of coffee later that day. Mark got a call from a production company in Los Angeles. They wanted to discuss distributing his documentary on a larger scale. Emma sat on the edge of the couch while he talked, pretending to scroll through her phone. But she could tell from his tone that this was big. When he hung up, he looked both excited and unsure. "They want me in LA next week," he said. "That's amazing," Emma replied quickly, though a small ache began forming in her chest. "Yeah," he said, staring at the floor. "It's what I've been working for." "But," he looked up at her, "it means leaving again." Emma forced a smile. "You've always been moving. It's who you are." He didn't answer, but she could feel the weight in his silence. Over the next few days, they continued editing small details of the film, spending hours side by side. Every moment felt sharper now, as if both of them knew something was ending but didn't want to say it out loud. The rooftop talks became quieter, the laughter shorter, yet the connection between them only grew deeper. It's like two people holding on to the last page of a story they didn't want to finish. One evening, they took a walk through the city. It was cool and breezy, lights glowing softly through the fog. They stopped at a small diner for dinner, sitting across from each other in a booth by the window. Mark looked at her for a long time before saying, "Do you ever feel like you meet the right person at the wrong time?" Emma's heart skipped. "All the time," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "That's what this feels like." She took a sip of her coffee, trying to keep her voice steady. Maybe it's not about timing. Maybe it's about learning what someone was meant to show you. He nodded slowly. You showed me how to be honest with myself. That's not something I'll forget. They finished dinner quietly. When they stepped outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. As they walked, Emma thought about how strange life could be, how one unexpected meeting could change everything that night. Back at his apartment, she started packing her things. Her flight back to Seattle was the next morning. She moved slowly, folding each piece of clothing as if trying to delay the moment. Mark watched from the doorway. You don't have to rush, he said. She turned to him, smiling gently. If I don't go now, I'll never leave. He walked closer. Maybe you shouldn't. His voice was low, filled with emotion, but not desperate. He wasn't asking her to stay for him. He was asking what her heart wanted. Emma took a deep breath. You're about to start something big, Mark. You'll be in LA, surrounded by opportunities. I can't hold you back from that. You're not holding me back, he said firmly. You've been the reason I finally moved forward. Her throat tightened. Then maybe that's enough. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the rain starting up again outside. Finally, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest. Promise me something, she said softly. No matter where you go, keep telling the truth, even when it scares you. He nodded. Only if you promise the same, I will. The next morning, they rode to the airport in silence. When they reached the terminal, Emma turned to him and smiled through the ache in her heart. You showed me what I needed to watch, she said gently. He smiled, the same soft smile that had started all of this. And you showed me what I needed to feel. They hugged, holding on a little longer than friends normally would, but not in a way that broke boundaries. It was the kind of embrace that said everything words couldn't. Then she walked toward the gate, not looking back until she reached the line for security. When she finally turned, Mark was still standing there. Watching her, she waved, and he lifted his hand slightly in return. When she boarded the plane, Emma felt both full and empty. Life had given her something beautiful, only to remind her that even beautiful things can't always stay. But she didn't regret a single moment. Back in Seattle, her days slowly fell back into rhythm. But everything felt new. Somehow colors brighter, sounds softer, the world a little more alive. She started writing again, something she hadn't done in years. Words poured out of her, like they had been waiting for this moment. Weeks later, she received a small package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a note and a flash drive. The note read, "It's finally done. The world deserves to see what you helped create." Emma plugged it into her laptop. It was the final version of the film. This time, there was an added dedication at the end for the one who reminded me to look beyond the lens. Tears welled in her eyes. She leaned back in her chair and smiled through them. Mark had kept his promise to tell the truth no matter what. Months passed and the film went on to win several awards. Mark's name appeared in interviews, headlines, and film panels. But every time she saw him on screen, she noticed the same thing, his honesty. That part of him hadn't changed. One evening, she received another message from him. Heading back to Seattle next month. There's a new project. Maybe we can catch up. Emma read the message twice before typing back, I'd like that. The day he arrived, the city was glowing with spring sunlight. They met at the same cafe where they'd first filmed together. When she saw him walk in, it felt like no time had passed. He smiled, that familiar, calm smile. You look happy, he said. I am, she replied. And you? Better than I've been in a long time. Sat for hours, talking about life, work, and everything that had happened. There was still warmth between them, but it had changed, matured. It wasn't longing anymore. It was understanding. When they parted that evening, Mark handed her a small envelope. Don't open it now, he said. Wait until you get home. Curious? Emma nodded and tucked it into her bag. That night, sitting by her window with the city lights glowing outside, she opened it. Inside was a still frame from the film. It was her, sitting by the window, sunlight on her face, smiling faintly. On the back he had written, "You were always the story." Emma stared at the picture for a long time, her heart full. Life wasn't perfect. It was unpredictable, messy, and fleeting, but moments like these made it worth living. She placed the photo on her shelf, next to her favorite books, and whispered to herself, maybe that's what love really is, not about keeping, but about remembering. Outside, the city lights flickered, and somewhere far away, she imagined Mark editing another story, another truth, carrying a little piece of hers with him.